Is it more challenging to finance timber-led developments?
I would say in our experience, no. In the period that we were looking to finance this project and others, what has been challenging is development finance, period.
A lot of people obviously think that fire is a concern, and obviously it is, as I was alluding to before. Water is probably the bigger concern.
I mean, with your eyes open, there are some things that you're going to need to do far earlier in the process than you would ordinarily.
This building uses just under 2,400 cubic metres of timber, which at that regrowth rate would take 15 minutes to regrow back. So in that context term, it's a pretty amazing material to use.
Today on the People Property Place podcast, we're going to do something a little bit different today. I'm currently sat in Lambeth, SE11 at Paradise, Bywater Properties' brand new mass timber office development spanning over 63,000 square foot of best-in-class sustainable workspace that is going to lock away over 60 years of tenant operating emissions, and it's due for completion in Q1 2025. My name is Matthew Watts. I'm the founder and managing director of Rockborn, a real estate executive search firm, and host of the People Property Place podcast. And joining me today is Theo Michel, co-founder and COO of Bywater Properties. Among his many jobs, Theo leads on project delivery, overall creative direction, and environmental and social impact. And as well, Pavlos Kilifton, head of development, who joined the business earlier this year. He brings over 20 years of experience in real estate development and has been responsible for the delivery of nearly 3 million square foot of best-in-class assets. The plan today is to discuss some FAQs relating to timber construction. We will be discussing ESG, green construction methods, embodied carbon, and how this all relates to the investment, development, and leasing of real estate. Theo and Pavlos, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Theo, coming to you first, just to set a bit of context, can you just give me a little bit of background to Bywater Properties and the history to Paradise as well?
Yeah, sure. So we've been running since 2006, started by myself and a guy called Richard Walker, who is possibly better known these days for his family business, Iceland Foods, that he's now chairman of. And I guess we started really as a family office for the Walker family, originally, myself and Richard, actually out in Poland to begin with, and we started building a portfolio out there before we refocused into the UK. And roughly at that same time, Richard took the decision to go back to the family business, and we carried on Bywater's growth with myself and Patrick O'Gorman, who now runs the business alongside me. And I guess we evolved from that family office beginning through to a multifamily office. We raised a small fund, but actually then have had a very significant step change in the last few years, really because of this building, where we've become part of the Sumitomo Forestry group. Sumitomo Forestry bought a 50% stake in Bywater Properties, 51% actually, really very much on the back of this project that they invested in because they were looking for a signature timber-led building in the UK. So now our history is very significantly moved on, and we're part of that enormous global organisation, which is predominantly focused on timber construction all around the world.
Amazing. Can you just talk to me about this site? What was here beforehand? When did you buy it?
Sure. So this site used to be the old Costa coffee roasting site, and I guess thinking about how the size of Costa now, it's sort of extraordinary that it lasted for so long in this quite tight site right in the city of London. It's they moved out. They were acquired by Whitbread. The roasting business was completely outgrown this location. So we bought this site from Whitbread, actually not from Costa, in 2018, and then took the site through planning. Always knew from the outset that this was never going to work in planning terms for residential development, which in many ways would have been a kind of natural fit for this location. We had to stick with a employment use. And I guess that formed a fundamental part of our thinking that led to the building we're in now and the timber building, because we recognised that from a commercial point of view, we couldn't just do another general Grade A office building in this location. There had to be something really special about this building to make it viable as an office. And so we started thinking about what might that be, particularly really inspired by the fact that we bordered directly onto a park, and we became really interested in this relationship between an office building and a park, the relationship between the park and healthy workspaces, what the implications of that are for designing an office building. And actually, because we're on Old Paradise Street, it started off as a little bit of a gift, if you like. The name has stuck, but it started off as a provocation to the design team to say, what might Paradise look like as an office building if we thought about Paradise as a kind of inspiring narrative around healthy building. And that started us down this track of thinking about timber in relation to the park, and then thinking about carbon and the environmental consequences of timber and how all that sits together under this kind of umbrella ambition of what might Paradise look like.
Pavlos, coming to you, for the people listening, what is mass timber?
So mass timber is a name given to a collection of materials where you're using component parts of timber bonded together to form new members. So in this project, we've got two representatives of mass timber. We've got CLT and glulam beams. If you research it, there are many three-letter acronyms to cover a multitude of different types of component parts put together to make mass timber products. So CLT effectively is the cross-lamination of sheet timber of a certain thickness, which creates a bonded web, and that's where it gets its tensile strength from. And it's primarily used in horizontal planes, but can be used in wall forms as well. And the key examples here is obviously the floors. It can come in various thicknesses, 3-ply, 5-ply, 7-ply up to 9-ply in terms of thickness. Glulam is, again, a similar process where we're taking larger members and they're bonded together with glue. You can get dowel fixed laminated panels as well. And they're predominantly used for long spans. So we see them in the columns and in the beams in this building where you've got large, long members to try and emulate the properties of steel.
When you were kind of researching, Theo, or kind of coming up with a design for this particular asset, at what stage did timber really start becoming apparent that it is going to be a viable product and a viable material to be able to build Paradise within?
It was a fairly early stage that we took the decision to properly investigate timber. As I said before, that largely came about thinking around what would create an exceptional working environment. But as we began to understand more the consequences for carbon, we fixated quite early that this was something that we wanted to pursue. But in terms of when did we get to the point of certainty, I guess early on we appreciated that we're going to be a series of challenges to overcome. Cost being one, all the engineering challenges around timber. So we took on a fair degree of design risk. I think it's fair to say, pursuing that timber route until that point of certainty, which I guess really came after we had passed a full-scale fire test, which we undertook to know with absolute confidence that this was a design that was going to meet regs and was going to be deliverable. So quite some period of time, really, that we were pursuing this ambition at some risk.
And from a planning perspective, Pavlos, are there challenges if you kind of are submitting a scheme that is timber-led compared to other more traditional materials?
From a planning perspective, actually it's a benefit because current planning policy is to try and promote the use of carbon-friendly materials. From a buildability perspective, there definitely is. As Theo sort of alluded to, post-Grenfell, the industry has had to take a long, hard look at itself in relation to building regs approval processes. And I think over the last 20 years, we probably got fairly complacent with how we put buildings together, relying on traditional materials that we normally use. I think it's right that that's had a bit of a shake-up. Timber is a different animal in its own right. Steel and concrete are only affected by fire, whereas timber can potentially be a source of fuel for fire. So you have to actually design the building understanding what the properties of timber are and how they'll react in certain fire conditions, as opposed to a steel and concrete building where you're just only interested in how the fire will affect those materials. So you have to take a much more holistic approach, which I think is a good thing because, again, like I said, the industry's probably gotten a little bit lazy with steel and concrete, which also have implications when they're affected by fire. The timber process means that we've got to go through a few extra hurdles, but it means we should have a better product and a safer product at the end of it.
Are there other countries that are like leading the way in terms of kind of timber construction that we can look to as a kind of a UK industry to learn the lessons from and apply them over here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Pavel, you probably agree. You know, the Nordics stand out. Projects like Wood City in Sweden, France as well, making big progress on some really significant scale timber projects, and the Netherlands. I mean, you know, those are the obvious kind of close to home, if you like, examples. Transferring that learning from those geographies back to the UK is always difficult. I mean, one of the great advantages we have in London is, for example, architecture firms. You know, there are many firms working on those projects which have satellite offices in London, so we can tap into that expertise. Not necessarily the same thing as just lift and shifting the same approach, because you've got different building control regimes, you know, lots of different overlays. But definitely, I think, you know, the UK is playing catch up in that space, and we're certainly finding the expertise in terms of architects, engineers, and so on, who are
testing
working
data
across those, testing the data, sharing data. That is. I think my feeling is that is happening in the timber space in a way that is not maybe happening to the same degree on conventional construction, in terms of that willingness to share and try and build a body of knowledge and
pay it forward and give other people the blueprint to be able to go and expedite the acceleration of buildings like this.
Yeah.
What are some of the constraints that you're faced when building with timber?
Timber's constraints. A lot of people obviously think that fire is a concern, and obviously it is, as I was alluding to before. Water is probably the bigger concern. Timber, as you can appreciate, what it is as a product, it's a delivery system for water and nutrients through the trees or the plants. So it lends itself to obviously trying to absorb water, and we know that timber sat in water for long periods of time will decay and degrade. So water management is a key part of timber development that you probably don't have to appreciate as much when you're doing steel and concrete. We had a very good timber management, water management system here on site with the contractors Gilbert Ash at Paradise, which was fairly well tested. We were putting the timber frame up in February, March and April this year, and if you can remember, February, March and April this year was probably one of the wettest on records. I think a couple of the locals would call out if we're building an arc as they would walk past, which was always met with much fun. But if you have a good management system and you can deal with the water properly, which we did here, then that's a consideration you've got to make sure you're on top of. Is
it more expensive, Theo, building a building out of timber in comparison to other more traditional sources?
I can answer that one. Do you want me to?
Well, I think the simple answer is yes. It tends to be slightly more expensive. Again, you know, Pavlos can add to this, but when we did an accurate full cost plan on this building, and bearing in mind obviously that steel, concrete prices, energy prices constantly fluctuating, which has a bearing on this. But when we did an accurate assessment, going back to your earlier question about our no-go decision point on timber, we came out 3.6% more expensive for this timber structure than we would have with a conventional build. So yes, more expensive. However, our judgment call, and I think our judgment call would remain the same today, is that we felt there was equal value, if not more value, to be gained on the flip side, if you like, of that cost value equation. So it was still worth doing. So I don't know your view.
No, I think that's right. I think the key points we're sort of doing at that time, that was probably correct. Nowadays, because there is a bit more interest in timber as a component part, you know, timber versus concrete and steel, it is a more expensive element. We're sort of being quoted 10 to 15% more expensive on a component for component basis. But to Theo's point, in the round, we're seeing a much greater benefit to the project. It's faster to deliver, so you've got less prelims costs. It's put together off-site, it's factory made, so it's almost comes together seamlessly and put together very well. So you don't have a lot of abortive costs and potential errors, as well as obviously it's lighter, which means we don't have to do as much in the foundation work. So when you put it in the round, that gap closes to a whole building project cost of premium of circa about 3%.
So you touched on some of the benefits of developing in timber. Can you just touch on a couple of others that may be less obvious?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a whole series of benefits. I mean, some of the less obvious perhaps are things like health in the workspace, where there's the beginnings of some really interesting research looking at stress levels, for example, in a timber building. But the overwhelming impact really that comes from building in timber like this is the impact on carbon. So while we find ourselves, at the time we made our decision, maybe 3.6% more expensive in terms of the project cost, in terms of where our outturn is on carbon, we're just so dramatically better than a conventional building. So we're coming in at roughly 40% of the embodied carbon footprint that we would expect were this to be built as a conventional office building. So that translates to just over 400 kilos of carbon per metre squared compared to an industry benchmark. And this is constantly getting driven down, but somewhere around 1,000, say, for a kind of vanilla, if you like, conventional building. So you've got a small impact on cost, but such a vast difference in terms of the carbon performance. And that, to our mind, is what really is driving the value in terms of how tenants think about carbon and in the choices that they make, but maybe most importantly, end investors, because we are a developer trader, will be looking for a likely institution to buy this from us. Where buildings like this sit in terms of their appetite for truly demonstrable low carbon buildings, that's where you see the huge step forward from using timber.
So it ticks all of the E, S and the G aspects of sustainable development, kind of fitting in all those different buckets.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for the timber piece, I guess is most obviously addressing the E point. I think our view, and certainly the view of Sumitomo Forestry, our parent company now, is, it's difficult to see how we're going to hit the sorts of targets that we're setting ourselves in industry without using an element of timber. That doesn't mean timber only. That doesn't mean pure timber. That might be timber hybrid, steel timber, concrete timber, whatever it might be. But timber brings such advantages in terms of the carbon footprint. All of the projects we're looking at going forwards to hit the kind of ambitious targets we're setting have a significant element of timber in them.
Pavlos, Paradise isn't just a purely timber-driven building. You do use concrete and you do use steel in the building. Why is that?
That's right. I mean, like Theo sort of alluded to, it's a timber-first approach that we're trying to achieve. We think that timber is part of the solution to the climate problem that we have, but it's not the only solution, and that has to be measured with good use of other materials. Steel and concrete are excellent materials and have properties that timber just struggles with, and where we need them to do those properties, they're the best placed product to use. But the point is to try and use them responsibly, not just use them wholesale. So in this building we have a concrete core. The fire core obviously is the life safety element with both escape stairs in it. Concrete has a very good fire retardant properties to it, and it was what was required of the building control to give them comfort. So we did that solution there. Elsewhere we've used steel on the central spine, which is where we've got most of our services running through. Glulam beams are great for holding up strong elements, but they're very difficult to cut holes through in order to get services through. So we put steel where we needed services to thread through to get distribution throughout the floor plate. And then again, that's an economical use of steel. Because we've cut the holes in it, we're using a lot less of those steel members on site.
Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People Property Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much.
Are you limited to height when it comes to timber buildings?
Yes, in relation to fire and building safety, not specifically. There's more steps you have to go through to test and ensure the integrity of a taller timber building. So there are guidance marks now that set out between 11, 18 and then higher buildings, and they come with different risk categories that have to be qualified as you do. So you can build taller, but it comes with more challenges.
Is it more challenging to finance timber-led developments?
I would say in our experience, no. In the period that we were looking to finance this project and others, what has been challenging is development finance, period. I certainly didn't perceive that the fact that this was a timber building or a timber hybrid building necessarily contributed to that. Development finance is difficult at the moment. I think arguably, like any development finance, if your question is running very much to the development phase, what finance partners really want to see is that at the end there's a strong prospect of them being refinanced out, and that to some extent runs to the point around, is there an institutional appetite for buildings like this, which we feel strongly that there is. So no, I don't see why people should necessarily be nervous around financing of timber or timber hybrid buildings. I guess other aspects like insurance we might come on to talk about, are more challenging, although challenges that aren't insurmountable.
Yeah, and I guess to Pavlos's point earlier, there's it's not a completely timber-led building. There is the concrete and there is the steel, and there's just other loops and hoops to kind of jump through to get them comfortable on that. Pavlos, where does the timber in this building Paradise come from?
It comes from two sources, actually. I think it's Germany and Austria. Most of the timber in CLT and Glulam products is European-led. Mostly because they have a good quality species out there that deals with dry weather and actually has less absorption requirements that UK timbers have. They also have very good track record in sustainable forest growth, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Theo, the Stora Enso position is that European forestry growth has grown 60 over the last 60 years, so they're harvesting a lot less than what they're actually growing. The beauty of the timber that we use from sustainable timber growth forests is that it is, I think I'm right in saying, I know that the guys at SFC say, it is one of the only renewable construction materials available. The regrowth rate for European forest regrowth is, I think it's 2.75 cubic meters a second. This building uses just under 2,400 cubic meters of timber, which at that regrowth rate would take 15 minutes to regrow back. So in that context term, it's a pretty amazing material to use.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The area of European forestry has been growing over the last number of decades, and that stat around 15 minutes to regrow, if you like, a building of this size is kind of extraordinary, but it really helps, I think, visualize just the potential of timber for delivering buildings like this. It's a huge resource.
And plus, back to that point about the construction technology behind it all, it's all bolted together. I mean, at the end of the life of this building, a lot of people talk about the longevity of it, it can all be taken apart and repurposed elsewhere, either as individual component parts or even as a single building taken off site and reconverted into a community hall or a school or something else. So it has a lot of longevity to it.
Theo, talk to me about the journey from tree to building.
Sure. So as Pavlos mentioned, the trees for this building came from Europe, Austria, Germany, and generally they're about, I think I'm right in saying, an 80-20% mix spruce and pine. I guess the important thing is that when a tree grows, it's absorbing carbon at a peak to about 50, 60 years, and then that absorption begins to decline. So what our forestry partners aim to do is harvest the trees at that peak after they've absorbed, and then essentially you can think of locking away that carbon that's been stored into timber into a building, which hopefully is here for another 100 years, or, as we've discussed, has the ability to be dismantled in a way that you would struggle to do with a concrete building, and then reused. So you're locking that carbon away for a long period of time. The other important aspect, obviously, is the maths, if you like, around carbon wouldn't stack up unless, when you harvest a tree, you replant a tree. And in fact, it's close to 3-to-1 is the ratio of planting to harvesting. So always more being planted than is harvested. And from the forestry of our partners, they're always harvesting less in any one year than has grown in that year. Hence why, as we mentioned before, overall the stock of forestry is actually growing quite significantly. So the trees are harvested in Austria, Austria and Germany for the columns, Austria for the floor slabs, and then brought directly from the factory in the pre-cut, precise way. I think the other thing that's really fascinating about timber buildings is just how fast they are to put together and how few people are needed. So that kit of parts, that great Meccano set, if you like, that came from Austria, was put together by most part about 7 people on site, a crane operator and roughly 6 people to assemble this huge Meccano
flat
set.
pack,
almost like a huge flat pack. Yeah, exactly right.
Pavlos, you've developed nearly 3 million square feet of real estate. How does a timber building, and specifically this one, compare to the others that you've delivered?
There really isn't any difference. I mean, as I said before, under the building control element, we do have to go through a few extra hurdles and hoops, but I think that ends up with a better product. But in terms of the end product, it's no different to a steel and concrete building, and arguably we would say that there are benefits to the process. Steel and concrete, by its nature, at the end of its life, will have to be broken down to be dismantled or cut. This building, like a big piece of flatback, can also be reversed engineered and debolted or disassembled for reuse elsewhere. So in terms of space, it's best in class grade A office space, 10,000 square foot floor plates over 5 levels with the reception, all the end of trip facilities, everything else that you'd expect in a modern office building.
And when did you start work on site, Theo?
At the beginning of 2023, started with demolition.
And it's set for completion Q1 2025.
Yep, early 25, yep.
So as we sit here today, what is left to go on to kind of complete the building?
Well, we're sat here in one of the more advanced floor plates. So the raised access floor is down. The facade is on. You can see the lights are all fitted. So it's internally it's really coming together. Meanwhile, outside the last elements of the facade on the high levels are taking shape, and then the focus is all on end of trip, back of house. All the finishing pieces in the core.
And it's fair to say that the sustainability to this building isn't just the timber. A lot of work went into the elevations, the use of terracotta as opposed to brick has a lower carbon element to it. Obviously, we've gone to a very good solid to glass ratio to ensure that we have operational energy efficiency within the building. There's a fairly good story behind the terracotta and the use of the green. It's not just green because we like green, was it? It was part of a competition?
Yeah, so we're again, you were asking about ESG earlier, and I think one of the areas that our industry does struggle with is how to address the S problem, and how you in a more meaningful way try and engage local communities in what you're doing. So yeah, Pavlos is alluding to a project that we ran with a local school who helped design elements of the facade. We've got quite a decorative part of the facade, particularly on the lower levels, that's visible to the park side and also the main street side. And that really was in part an echo to local history. The Royal Dalton factory is round the corner, so you've got that wonderful Victorian heritage of very decorated, beautiful glazed tile facades. We were working in terracotta, felt that was an interesting opportunity to play with that historical reference. But then it gave us a perfect project to work with school children on. So took them to Royal Dalton, took them to the Garden Museum nearby where they did some sketching from the collection, then ran a workshop with clay where they're looking at modelling and beginning to try and think about that process of how you take a design through a model to actually something that can be manufactured. So they had a genuine hand in designing the facade tile that is being put onto the front of the building at the moment, and we brought them back to site about a year and a half later now, but the same cohort of school kids came back a few weeks ago to see those tiles that they'd worked on being fitted onto the facade. So, things like that didn't cost us a lot to do. It took some time, took some energy, but has hopefully had real impact. And certainly we've had really positive feedback from not only the children but the school and others involved in the process, that actually finding a way of embedding just small touches like that within a project of a way of breaking down those barriers that I think do exist between the development community and local communities that we work in is hugely important. And those are the sorts of things in the S space, if you like, that we're really keen to champion.
Yeah. Give them a sense of engagement and
it
ownership
sets the
over
building
the asset.
within the community in which we're putting it in as well. So it's not just an environmentally friendly building within there, but it has had buy-in from the community that it's going to be a part of as well. I mean, and even the S part of it translates right down to the site level basis, because feedback I get from the contractors all the time is how much they've enjoyed working with the timber. It gives them a sense of craftsmanship, which they probably lost with just putting together lots of steel and concrete. So it goes on all levels.
As we look forward in terms of kind of occupying this building, we're a stone's throw from Westminster. I think from the top floor you can look out over the city. It's got phenomenal views. Who do you think is the ideal occupier for a building of Paradise's magnitude?
I think we've always designed the building to be multi-let, but have hoped that we would find one tenant to take the whole as an HQ building. In terms of who that tenant might be, I think, as I said right at the very beginning, we always knew working in this location we're not going to be looking for big law firm or banks and so on. But I think this location, particularly because of its relationship to Westminster, it is really powerful for things like charity sector, number of approaches from higher education, obviously central and local government, very relevant to be so close to Westminster. So we've had approaches from a really broad swathe of different occupiers, actually, which has been really encouraging.
I'm glad you mentioned Westminster Hall, another example of medieval timber construction.
Yeah.
Going back a number of years, I can only imagine. Pavlos, are there any differences for tenants operating a mass timber-driven building?
No, I mean, in terms of building material, we've been using timber for a long time in construction. It's no different to steel and concrete. The operating efficiencies of the building are more about the environmental performances of the whole of the building. So it's your envelope, it's your insulation, it's your air tightness, it's the materials that go into it, it's your MEP equipment, and everyone is, whether it's a steel or concrete building or a timber building, is vying to achieve better carbon efficiencies in relation to the operation energy of their building. So in that regard, it's the same, but we're all trying to work to a very high level, which is great for the industry. In terms of maintenance, as alluded to before, timber is able, if well maintained, is able to last for a very long time. Like I said, jokingly, Westminster Hall has a timber roof that's, from the medieval times. There are plenty of examples of longevity in timber. And this one in particular has the opportunity to be deconstructed and reused and repurposed. So even at the end of its potential 60, 100-year life cycle, it can be reused and repurposed and provide the site available for its next phase of life. So in that respect, it's just as efficient, if not slightly better, than having a non-timber building.
Theo, what advice would you give someone, a developer who's looking to take on a timber-led project based on all the experience that you've garnered with this Paradise project?
I think to begin with, don't be dissuaded, but go in with your eyes open. That there are some things that you're going to need to do far earlier in the process than you would ordinarily. So, I mean, as I've said before, we are now working on a number of timber projects, we typically would get our fire engineer or building control specialist to have a quick once over a project at a very, very early stage. We will reach out to our insurers at a very early stage. There's a series of things, if you're thinking about timber building, that you would want to factor in and bring forwards. But they're all things you would have been doing anyway, just typically much later in the process. So if people do that, and I would certainly encourage, as well as the concern issues around insurance and getting those covered off, some of the positives around getting carbon assessment early to support enthusiasm, if you like, in your design team, that actually is worth pursuing this because look what the numbers look like. Then I think we certainly feel, so Pavlos and I are working on a number of these projects now. There's no reason to be dissuaded from pursuing a timber route. Just go in with your eyes open and think about things a little bit differently. Think about the whole project as a timber project from the outset, not pursue a conventional building approach and then wonder halfway through, well, what about pivoting this to timber? That's where people, I think, will come unstuck.
That's absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. And I think the added element to that would be seeking out consultants and advisors to assist you in that process who have an understanding of timber as a material, because it does act differently than steel and concrete. And as Theo said, if you go it from the outset as a timber building, then you're on a right path. If you're trying to pivot from another material to try and make timber do something that it's not quite designed to do, you'll come into trouble. We've been fortunate. We've had a lot of great consultants and contractors assist us on projects who have a wealth of knowledge. There is a wealth of knowledge out there, and they're all very keen to share that knowledge and promote the use of timber. So that's another key point, is making sure you have the right team with you.
Theo, is there an increasing appetite from institutional investors to buy timber developed buildings?
I think I'd probably pivot the question slightly to say, is there appetite for ESG buildings or sustainable buildings backed by scientific targets? Yes, absolutely. I think we're clear that has become an incredibly strong theme in the investment market. Does that translate through to timber buildings? Well, I think one of the challenges we have is that there are so few of them. I mean, other than the black and white building in Shoreditch, which is a great early example, not traded, owner occupied, there are very, very few, and this will be one of the first. So I think that has been one of the challenges for timber buildings and answering questions around investment appetite, yield compression, green premiums, all that sort of nested set of questions. There are so few proof points to really test that, but certainly we're very confident that from the conversations that we've had that institutional investors are getting really comfortable, really excited about timber on the basis of the carbon story that attaches to it, and are getting increasingly comfortable that the concern issues around things like fire, water that Pavlos mentioned, insurance and so on, are being covered off. So yes, we're very confident that there is appetite for buildings like this.
Theo, Pavlos, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been great to hear a little bit more about Paradise as a building and also timber and where that fits in. And I'm excited to come along to the launch party end of Q1 to see the finished product. So thank you.
Thanks very much for having us,
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information. Or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you